I'm excited to talk to you about some research that we've been working on across the river on date labels. Food waste has kind of popped up in the kind of national psyche a bit in terms of an issue. Food and beverage waste, the numbers are pretty interesting if you, depending on how you count them, how the definitions go, and there are all sorts of definitions for how you define food waste. Anywhere from 20 to 40% of food that is comes out of the field does not end up in a human stomach. So it kind of shocks people a bit when they hear that. That's both in the US and pretty much globally. The popular number at the global level, although the data is a bit tenuous, is about a third of food does not become consumed. And so you've got things like UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, which focuses on reducing food loss and waste as a means to address global food insecurity. And so you get a lot of the interest, and other countries have then adopted that as a policy goal. US has adopted that policy goal back, I think, in fall of 2015 to cut food waste by 50%. You don't know what the baseline is, but they decided they would cut it by 50%. And actually, there was recently a joint meeting with Commissioner Wheeler, Gottlieb of FDA, and Purdue of USDA re-upping and reconfirming from the Obama administration dedication to reduce food waste as a US federal policy goal. So I thought that was pretty interesting that even across two very distinct federal administrations, the food waste goal has survived as a point of focus. Households tend to be responsible for a fair amount of the wasted food, particularly in the United States, as well as other kind of consumer-facing interests. And a lot of the suggestions are that these folks here in the restaurants and the grocery are changing their ways because they're trying to please the consumer. So massive piles of fruit that look attractive because consumers are attracted by massive piles of beautiful fruit. Milk is one thing that we're looking at here kind of closely because working with Denny Heldman and his group in food science, Chris Simons, some of you in the room have worked with them as well, and milk is a key issue. The date label on the milk is obviously pretty salient to most of us. The most consumed beverage in the US, 10 to 15% of the food waste by weight is milk, so it's an interesting and compelling example to look at. And the label dates are typically there to help stores rotate their stock, yet all of us probably key on that date and some people I know are very proper about tossing out milk as soon as the date arrives. What do date labels teach consumers? Emily Broadleib and her group, I know she's been here before for one of Jill's events. Their group at Harvard Food and Law Policy Clinic has done a deep dive on policies regarding date labels, and she claims that they're poorly understood, surprisingly underregulated. Meanings and timeframes are generally not defined in law. A dearth of rigorous policy analysis about these labels. And for the most part, if milk is handled properly, in the case of milk, it will be safe to consume even after the quote-unquote expiration date passes. ReFed is this group funded through Rockefeller, Think Family Foundation, Walmart Foundation, working with Deloitte and others for analysis, reducing food waste through economics and data. They rate standardizing food date labels as being one of the most promising avenues for reducing food waste, and so it's interesting to jump in and think about this as well. So if you think about the date labels that are out there, and this comes from some work that Harvard did a few years ago, we've got a sell-by date, we've got a display until and a use-by date, we've got a best before, we've got a better if used before, we've got a best if used by. There's a proliferation of phrases out there, and nobody really knows what any of these mean. If you want to take a deeper dive on this is nice for a classroom. About 3 minutes from Adam ruins everything about what the date labels on food actually mean. Not much, because they're not regulated whatsoever. when Harvard threw these phrases out at a national sample, phrases like best if used by, best by, consumers are generally interpreting those as indicators of quality. Terms like expires on or used by were being interpreted more as an indication of safety. Sell by was seen to be more of a message to store, but obviously people are still using those dates for their own at-home use as well. Where do we stand in terms of date labels? Most date labels are generally unregulated. At the federal level, there's been some moves to try to introduce federal legislation. Food Date Labeling Act of 2016 wanted to get to a kind of a two-phrase system, one to talk about quality, which would have been best if used by, and then one to talk about safety, which would have been expires on. USDA FSIS issued some guidance in 2016 encouraging product date to be best if used by if they're talking about quality, to try to hone in on that. Industries come together through the Food Marketing Institute, the Grocers Manufacturing Association, and they announced a standardized voluntary regulation, again, 2 lanes, used by for safety and best if used by for quality. And some firms, Walmart being one, is really pushing this down their supply chain and trying to quantify those so they can get credits towards their gigaton goal to reduce carbon emissions along their supply chain. And there's been some states trying to get into the action as well. California passed something very light-handed. Mass and New Jersey have tried to do something much more prescriptive, and those have gotten shot down so far. And I'll talk a bit about some efforts here in Ohio that we're involved with as well at the end. So what I'll talk about here now is a couple of experiments that we've been doing. If any of you have been over to the other side of campus, to the Parker building, I know some of you have a lot of connection with Parker. They've got facilities there to do consumer experiments. That's where the food science department will do a lot of things, like they'll pay you $20 to try 5 different chocolate bars to see if they've got the formulation just right. We've leveraged that space for a couple of experiments here, but focusing on date labels. The first one addresses the question, does the label itself really change the consumer decision process or not? How would consumers make discard decisions of foods that are more quality focused if they had to rely upon their senses rather than the actual date label? And then experiment 2 we've done with some direction from some national groups in coordination with them to look at the role of different phrases on the discard decision. So experiment 1, again, we're over in the OSU Sensory Lab. They draw their respondents from throughout Columbus. It's not a purely representative group from Columbus, but it's not all university people either, so it's outside of the bubble to some extent. Had them evaluate several packages of whole milk that was commercially bottled. We took this from Tamarack Dairy, who provides for Kroger out in Newark. Some of the bottles had original date labels, others had the date labels removed. And it was all about a sniff test. No tasting was allowed because we had to run a bunch of people through that day. We didn't have enough milk to have all this tasting happen. So we got about 90 folks, I think 88 regular milk drinkers. They went through and they smelled 2 flights of milk. And one contained a flight where there were 15, 25, 30, and 40 days post-bottling. They'd all been stored very well. One flight had a sell-by date on it. The other had no date. The orders were, I'll give you an easier vision here. So Tamarack, we had these samples, stored them, opened them, and about a third of the milk was removed after several days to kind of simulate the type of bottle of milk that you might have in your own fridge that you're trying to decide about. And then we brought them out 2 flights. One flight, the date labels were wiped off. Acetone takes that printing off really easily. And the other ones, the labels were intact from the original commercial bottling run. And then there was a sensory evaluation of those products. And so here, if we think about it, it was August 1, 2017, we did this. That was our sensory day. And then we had milk of different ages before that. And so all of them had an 18-day added on as their printed date label. That's Kroger's magic number for them, and their date horizon is 18 days past post-pasteurization. And so we had bottles that were looking really old on the day of, and some that still had days left. on the day of the sensory evaluation. Here's a view of the room. Here are our bottles, the ones with the dates on, those with the dates off, and some of the good folks running the business there. So we had our dates. I didn't make this. Ashwarya Badger, the co-author on this, did all the hard work on making this. I randomized the order, and then would randomize the order of the flights as well. And then people would come out, they would sniff the milk. I tell us if they would keep it, discard it if they're unsure. And then we had them, the trick is you sniff your wrist to reset your smell between each sample. For some reason that resets your olfactory to be ready for the next one. So what do we find? Well, what we have here are the percent intended discard. You said, this is in your fridge, what would you do with it? And so we got 15, 25, 30, and 40 days. And we do have an uphill here, which is what we would expect. That the older the milk, the more likely we are to discard. A little bit of a clumping here. Hardly any change between our 15 and 25 day sample, even though they're on opposite sides of the magic date. And then the older stuff was being discarded at a much higher rate. But this is when the date label was on. What happens when you wipe that date label off and give it to the same folks? Kind of all hell breaks loose. There's not a pattern in the data. Now it turns out, with some post-chemical analysis of the fumes, basically from the milk that were done by Ashwarya and Denny Heldman, we do know that our 15-day sample had a bit of an odd odor, odd flavor to it, an odd flavor note to it. And this was an exceptionally good sample in terms of its properties, in terms of its chemical properties. But what we found is basically when you take those date labels off, the intention to discard goes down nearly 30%, 28%. If you break this out, for those that were post-date, kind of the prime tossing ones, there's actually about a 40% reduction in intended discard by simply taking the date off. But oddly enough, this one 15-day milk that got a little funky for whatever reason, we find that those with a date on it actually were less likely to be discarded. And our working hypothesis is that that date serves as a safety blanket. A bit of an odd smell, but sure, it's still a date. I'm not going to pull the trigger and toss this. I smell this, there's no date on it, I'm chucking it right away because it's got a weird flavor note in the milk. So we have this kind of odd result, which is, could you just remove the date labels from milk and have this great improvement? Yes, that would probably reduce the discards of these post-date milks that have a decent storage properties to that, but you could also increase the discards of in-date milk that have just some type of incidental flavor note or perhaps a little bit of temperature abuse along the way. So here, it's more of a proof of concept. Date labels actually do matter. They did change the intended discard of these folks when confronted with a product. Consumers likely still want label guidance because they need that to help them kind of develop their senses and give them kind of a second point of reference when making that decision. And there are kind of smart labels that help encode whether or not a product has been temperature abused and kind of give a update of this that we're also looking at as well. But like any new technology, consumer facing, it's going to be a huge learning curve for people to actually embrace that. Of course, this was a study done here, small sample, a single date label phrase, sell by. Later on in the session, we actually had some temperature abused milk, but this was all well healed. Everything was handled with care and only from a limited range of dates. A single type of milk whole is, most people buy 2%, so it's a bit of an outlier in terms of the type of milk being used. And no attempt was made to assess the impact of the date label removal on purchase intent. So that would be very important, obviously, from the point of view of the bottler as well. So I'll pause there, see if there are any questions about that. How many of you toss the milk as soon as the date, or has somebody in your household that tosses the milk exactly on the date. That's okay. That's very common. That's very common. There's usually large arguments within a household about this.
Yes,
so.
there are.
Yeah.
So does Kroger pick their magical 18 days because of past research, or what?
It's just the number. I've heard claims that they will change it if they go a certain length of time, either with a lot of complaints, they'll then reduce it, or very few complaints, they, in theory, might extend it. But my recent discussions with them, it just seems like that is the date, and it's kind of just the way it is.
Just by way of clarification, when you mentioned temperature-confused milk and a smart label, I assume there are no electronic information that changes on the bottle or something?
Yeah, so these smart labels are color-coded, and they change colors over a course of days, but the change in color accelerates if the temperature goes above a particular threshold. Yeah, and so you can buy those for about a penny. Consumers don't really interpret them very clearly yet, so that would be the big hurdle. And it doesn't talk anything about the chemical nature of the milk, only whether it suffered temperature abuse. A lot of these are used on the supply chain facing pallet level at this point.
It changes color once it gets about 4 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, the clock moves more quickly once it gets above 4 degrees C. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just real quick, so with the ones where there were dates, they were instructed to smell each one, so they couldn't just look at the dates without any need to smell that one. So they were all.
So we directed them here to sniff them, so it was a sensory evaluation proper. The next one, we didn't instruct them to do anything with that, so I'll segue into this one. So we have the sense that dates are important. The question then becomes, there's a lot of policy activity around the phrase accompanying that date. Does that really make any difference or not? And so here we want to look at those actual phrases and then look at several different products as well. And this is where I gotta jump over to the other slideshow because I've never properly merged these two. So here again, we're in that same space. We've got participants coming through and they look at and evaluate, assess 9 different food packages. 3 different foods at 3 different purported freshness levels. So our group that came through the first week, and this is over this summer, just a couple months ago, they looked at lettuce, fresh chicken, and bread. These are all products that we obtain from local Kroger stores, basically. Week 2, we had them look at milk, cereal. We froze the chicken from the week before, and we had some eggs as well. Between subjects, everybody only had one phrase that they looked at in particular. So our analysis of whether these label phrases mean anything is a between subjects design. Nobody saw more than one phrase. We had 3 treatments. One was absolutely no label whatsoever. One was what we're calling the control or status quo or mixed. This kind of reflects all that heterogeneity in phrases that I talked about at the beginning. A lot of sell-bys, a lot of best befores. And then our treatment was the FMI and GMA suggestions to use best if used by, unless it's a safety issue, and then used by as the phrase. So they also had information treatment. Some got a placebo information treatment. Others got information about the label, which would probably be similar to educational campaign that might accompany the rollout of a new labeling system or something like that. They looked at this, answered a few questions about the information. Otherwise, they got a placebo information treatment where we had to do the same type of quiz, but on something totally unrelated. So all the products that were evaluated were basically the same actual age. They're all in date, they're all fresh, but we reprinted the labels. We got this fancy label maker that prints things on there, and so we relabeled the date and the phrase on each one so that some were out of date, even though they are ostensibly fresh because we bought them and presented them to them when they're actually fresh. So we talked a bit about this, label education. Again, we told them a bit about the label, how you might want to interpret it. And then there's something similar for the FMI and GMA labels. About a similar amount of information density here. But this is our kind of educational campaign proxy. And here's our subject group. We had about 350 come through on this. We also had a treatment where they were talking about purchasing this rather than whether or not they discard it. And we had another 350 look at that, different folks. And so we've got a group that's not surprisingly for a Columbus near campus audience, more highly educated. The racial balance is a bit skewed from the state level, typically a bit higher income. Our recruitment, we're on age 18 and above. If they purchase the focal products, no smell deficits, and we paid them about $20 for their 30 minutes of time. So pretty standard screening here. Bottom line, when we brought them through, only about 20% said that they would discard any particular product. This is about overall 6 products, all phrases, all freshness levels, and most of the not sures were keeps, and so about 80% said that they would keep this product if it were in their own refrigerator. And for all these, we took a little bit of the product out and made it look like it was half used, like it would be in the refrigerator. So the bread, we took out like a third of the slices of bread, etc., to kind of simulate what would be in their own fridge or in their own cupboard. So, do the labels matter? We just have raw averages here. Again, the no label, the height of the bar here is the fraction that intend to keep the product. Take that label off, it's the most likely to be kept, 90%. Add on the kind of old school labels with all the different phrases here, about 80% to be kept. And then the suggested FMI GMA labels, actually down a tick from there, about 4% lower in terms of the percent to be kept. Now I will note that in this information treatment, it's all talking about quality. Here we actually introduce the idea that some of the dates are going to be related to safety. And so it's not terribly surprising that when you start talking about safety in some of these information treatments, that perhaps you're going to get people a little bit more attuned to that. And if we get rid of the chicken, which is a safety product, the numbers are a little bit closer, but still a slight decline in the percent to keep from going from kind of the standard quo mixed labels to this new set of phrases. All right, here's my busy slide. What we then did is did some regression analysis to control for the fact that groups are going to have different education, different in terms of the exposure to kids, percent of the household, the shopping done by the participant, how well they did on their quiz, whether they're paying attention to the information. So gender, age, income, race, did some regression work, and basically what we have up here are bars that are adjusted for all that. If it's below the red line, it means that the new labels, FMI, GMA, were more likely to be tossed than if it had the old school labels on it. So we're seeing a lot of blue bars below the line. There's about a 2.2 percentage point effect size, but it's not statistically significant. So kind of similar to our raw numbers. So about a 2.2%. And then we broke it out into different groups. Everybody who saw all labels, all freshness levels, those who did not get the educational kind of treatment, the placebo information treatment, and then within that, those who saw the freshest product, the middle-aged product, and the oldest product, and then those who got the consumer education campaign, and breaking that out into the different age of products as well. Let's dive into one of these. For example, for chicken. Here we had sell-by was the old school term. If this were under the new voluntary standards, or most of the new standards suggested it would be used by, had things that were day before dates, 1 day after the package date, had gone, and 3 days after the package date, the oldest product here. And I've just got raw averages over here. So under both of these, we're seeing upper 90s in terms of the amount being kept. And then boom, a really sharp decline, which is not too surprising. People watch chicken pretty closely, and the date means a lot, and it falls off pretty quickly and pretty linearly thereafter. And indeed, we have a little bit of a wedge between our new labels, which oftentimes we'll talk about the safety of it, and the old ones that don't. But again, nothing statistically significant for this amount of power in this particular experiment. In general, for either the large group or the kind of the broken out groups as well. So, and if we go through all the products, we see similar types of freshness curves for lettuce. Nothing terribly statistically significant. One small subgroup. Bread is pretty strong. People keep this up to 4 days past. So a very flat freshness curve for both types of labels. And nothing statistically significant here in the regression work. Milk, this is a little bit funky. I think we did have some quality issues with one of the samples used in here, so we have kind of an oddball freshness curve there. And we've got pockets of statistical significance, but the overall ones, there's nothing terribly statistically significant. Another steep one for frozen chicken. This was chicken that you might not use, chuck in your freezer, and then evaluate whether or not you would keep it or not. A pretty steep curve there as well. And some statistical significance here overall. So this is probably one of the few that we kind of had that pop up. And then cereal, this goes out to 70 days past. We look at pretty steep freshness curve out to that type of a date, but not a lot of statistical significance here as well. So when we isolate this, do the regression work to see if the information campaign had any effect, it generally didn't, either for the probability of keeping the product, and we also had some information about how long they would intend to keep the product as well. And so nothing, and so our attempt to kind of do an information campaign did not seem to have any effect on whether or not they would change their discard decision. A few demographic effects. You are more likely to keep the product if you did less of the food shopping. If you're in the oldest versus the youngest category. Your level of formal education was high school or less. Your income level was lower. And you passed the quiz testing knowledge about the information treatment. And if you had more kids. So things that aren't terribly surprising, but you always have a way to figure out how to use this when you've got a lot of kids around here. So for this particular group, in this particular experimental design, we're finding that the preferred language that's appearing at the federal level, both in proposed federal legislation and among voluntary standards, is not having a big effect on likely discard. And so that's kind of an interesting outcome. That's we're on this particular study, we've been working with ReFed, that group, who's trying to evaluate these. And I think that was kind of an eye-opener. Now, what we haven't done, we haven't taken this to a national level yet, so we don't know if this is just a quirk of this particular experiment, this particular group of individuals, but we're seeing modest but negative effect sizes, so a little bit more discard with the new language, but nothing that's statistically significant for this power. This is a modest amount of power. It's not a huge study, but it's by no means massively underpowered. The strongest effects seem to be when shifting from the phrase intended for the retailer, the sell by, to one of these other phrases. And it might be suggesting that consumers are padding that sell by date more heavily than the equivalent best by date in their own minds when they're trying to make that discard decision. Use of label information, if you give that kind of quote-unquote education program, can be helpful sometimes to reduce the effect size, but not always. And there's no consistent relationship to product date and freshness, so it's not as if the phrases are making a big difference for the very old product versus the very young product. It's a fairly consistent relationship. So the implications are we want to take this out to a national level and make sure it's not our sample. But if this were to prove robust, it suggests that a simple language change is not going to be a cure-all to reduce discarding of products prematurely. Rather, it's going to have to be coupled with a recalibration of the dates actually printed on the label. So Kroger would actually have to not just change sell by to best if used by, but then also change from 18 days to 19, 20, 21 days if they really wanted to see effect in the reduction of discard. However, right, that's a big change, because if you are that retailer, that means you're probably going to have more people that actually will have a legitimate issue because they don't hold their milk at 4 degrees Celsius, or they mess up storing their milk, and so they're going to bring it back to you, so they're going to be more product returns by extending that date horizon out. So that would be more of a retail cost for them to deal with returns, but it would probably reduce the amount of product being prematurely disposed in home.
Right.
Yes.
Presume that last point is a negative.
Oh, I'm sorry, last point up here, last point.
That's your scenario of more customers taking product back to a retailer, is it negative?
From whose point of view? The retailer.
I've heard retailers describe it as a positive.
When
Customer
consumers,
service, right? So you don't question, you don't doubt, you don't sniff it, you just take it back, and it's a building of, it's actually a customer retention tool.
yeah, but it wears on
It's
department managers.
It's fairly rare that some people bring the actual product back.
Yeah, when I talk to the folks in the business, they say it happens all the time, and they're so I think I can see the points there that it builds. I think it depends how high up in the food chain within those companies you talk to. I think that I would see that language coming out from maybe store manager and above. If you're talking about a department manager and below, I don't think they're very happy with a lot of returns. Because then the store manager thinks the department manager's doing something weird in their particular departments, and then they're spending more time interfacing with the customer and have to be on their best behavior, and taking away time from reorganizing the shelves and keeping up stock and things like that. So I think both points are valid, and I think a lot of it's going to depend upon kind of where in the hierarchy the individual falls. But
Just as a follow-on.
yeah.
The overriding concern is discards. What do stores do with stuff that's returned? They hand it over to food pantries, et cetera. Or would they be more likely to expedite its actual use than by throwing it away?
Yeah, so returns, they won't,
They can't.
Yeah. because they've lost the chain of custody of that, so that won't be donated. But if they extend that horizon, they're probably discarding a lot less out of their own inventory because people will, buy things more often if the date's further out.
More thinking about the return.
Yeah.
To that point, that people buy it more frequently if the distance is further out, would they be more likely also to discard it? So if I'm at the store and the date is a few days from now, I'm only going to purchase that if I intend to use it in the next few days. Maybe I'm optimistic that I'm going to use something in the next 2 weeks and I don't get around to it.
Yeah. So I think the interesting question I think you're posing here is, so Kroger, for that example, goes from 18 days out to 21. There's going to be a whole set of supply chain responses to that in terms of when I get to the store right now, perhaps the average date out is 7 days or 10 days. That depends when I show up at the store. Will that same buffer still be there? Just everything is truly 3 days older and there's still 7 to 10 days left? Or will it now be 10 to 13 days out and nothing else earlier in the supply chain has been altered? Or does that give them more ability to reroute shipments between distribution centers when demand craters in one area and blooms in another because of weird weather events? And so they still maintain that 7 to 10 days, but they're wasting less on the middle of the supply chain because now they have more flexibility with that date. So I think that's kind of where